Welcome back to the show. So listen, no doubt about it, raising kids is tough, but it can be extra challenging when your child is navigating questions about their gender identity.
Our next guest has been through it personally and shares her experience, along with lots of practical advice in her new book, Beyond Pronouns, the essential guide for parents of trans children. Welcome, Tammy Plunkett. You are here, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Tammy, you wrote this book after your son Mitchell came out as trans when he was 11. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yes, so he came out in a journal that he left on my bed, and it was a bit of an overwhelming shock in the beginning. We thought we didn't know that he was transgender, but as time went on and we looked back, there was a lot of signs that were already there that we sort of ignored and just pushed aside.
What age was this around?
He was 11, so
Okay.
in grade 5.
Wow, okay.
I mean, let's talk about some of those early signs now in retrospect when you look back. You say that, you know, there might be things that if parents are watching who think, you know, my child might be questioning their gender identity. What are some of those signs to look for?
So the most important signs to look for are distress. So if they're social isolating and hopeless and self-harm, those are the big signs to take into consideration. Other signs are dressing in the gender that they're more comfortable as, wearing oversized clothes to hide parts of their body. And one sign that was shocking to me was not showering and not having personal hygiene because they didn't want to actually even face their own body.
Oh, wow.
That's really interesting. Let's talk about some of the terms that come up. For those who aren't aware, what is transgender versus cisgender and non-binary? Like, let's just kind of break down those terms.
So transgender is an umbrella term, and it really means that you don't identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. So when we're all born, a doctor or midwife looks between our legs and says, yeah, it's a boy or it's a girl. And it just means that you don't identify with the role that society puts on you with that label. Gender is all in our mind, and it's what we think of ourselves. So cisgender means that you do identify with the label that you were announced when you were born. And non-binary also doesn't identify with the label they were given at birth, but it also means that they don't only believe as that they're a girl or a boy.
Okay, I think it's important to make those distinctions. Listen, more and more teens than ever are coming out as transgender. And there might be some parents who are watching this, listening to your story, thinking, okay, well, how do I know if this is like my child figuring out their gender identity, or is this maybe just experimentation?
Yeah, and that's understandable, and experimentation is good because there is no harm in making sure that we are who we know ourselves to be. So none of this is fast. It is a slow journey, and there is no danger in dressing a different way, using a different pronoun, and trying things out, because then you find your authentic self. And I think even adults need to do more of that.
We were talking about that earlier on the show.
Yeah, totally. Hearing that your child doesn't identify as the gender, like, I'm sure that was quite distressing to even the most, I think, in touch parents will be worried about the way their child might be seen in the world, worried about the hardships that might impact their child. So you admit in your book that you didn't handle your son's announcement as much as you would have liked. So what were some of the things that you were thinking about when he came out to you and worrying about?
Yeah, so he came out right at the height of, I love your, if the U.S. sneezes, we catch the cold. It was in the height of, there was bathroom debates around transgender people in the U.S. And so I was terrified for him. I was worried he'd be beaten up in bathrooms, that he'd be ostracized and wouldn't be able to get a job or a partner later on in life. So that fear had me try to slow things down for him. But eventually, we made it through, and we actually have way more positive stories now than I had ever anticipated. You don't think of all of the good that can come from something. You only think of the bad things that can happen. But there's so much more good.
You know, we talk about transitioning, and there's so many forms of transitioning. And in your book, you discuss about the social transition. So when a child is transitioning socially, what are those other changes that a parent has got to keep in mind and can support?
Yes. So social transition, gender is a social construct. We dress and act out the gender that we're assigned at birth, and depending on what culture you're in, that's how you present. So a social transition for a child means you cut their hair or grow it long, buy new clothes, use different pronouns, and the parent is really in charge of that. We buy the clothes. We ask the school to make a change and use their preferred name. So it's so important to have the parent involved.
What's your advice for how to deal with other people? You know, it's not so much maybe what your experience is. It's that worry also about how will my parents or his grandparents deal with this? How will the people in the community who might not understand? Like, what are some tips you would give?
So my tips are, there's two ways of doing it. You can rip the Band-Aid off slow or fast, but always ask your child if they want to come out and if they are ready, if they want to tell grandma, or if you want to tell them, or they want you to tell them. And I like to give them time to process. I needed time to process. Grandparents and other people need time to process. But I steal a quote from Michelle Obama, and that is, "It's hard to hate up close." And I have seen the most stringent, traditional, conservative people embrace trans people because they are loved ones. And they finally get it when it's their loved one.
Let's talk about names for a moment. We talk a lot on this show about how for a lot of parents, naming your child before they're born often, it's like a big deal. There's a lot of weight and time and thinking put into a name. And so when we discuss a child who's transitioning, and oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes a name change is also involved in that process as well. Take us through from your perspective as a parent, what that's like. And also, you write about this, that for a parent, it's okay to mourn the loss of, a form of loss in that process that often naming ignites.
Exactly. Naming is hard, and I was lucky. Mitchell and I actually sat down with the baby book, and I was part of the process of finding his new name. But names have a lot of importance to us, and so I can be a little controversial because I give parents permission to mourn. And some people think, well, the child's not dead, why would you mourn? But it's the ideas that I had. I had a gender-specific idea of a prom dress and a father-daughter dance at a wedding. I had to let go of that. It's kind of like if you go through a divorce or you change cities, you have some loss, and it's okay for the parent to experience this loss. I always advocate that we deal with that loss away from the child. It's not the child's burden to console us, but yeah.
Great distinction to be made.
Your son Mitchell wrote the foreword for your book, and you both say that this was an experience that brought you closer together. So is that something that can happen for parents of transitioning kids? Like that it's not so much just about the mourning, that it actually can be something that bonds?
Yes, yes. And so the difficult parts are difficult and they're short-lived. And so at least for my family, every trans person is different, and every trans family goes through a different journey. I have to say that up front. I've met a lot of trans people through the support group, and I've heard different stories, and I've heard all of the happy endings. And how could we not get closer if we are all being authentic? So I believe that it's enriched our lives so much.
Oh, what a great book. Tammy, thanks for sharing your story and sharing Mitchell's story as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's tell everybody who is out there, Beyond Pronouns. That is the name of the book. Make sure you check it out.